Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the Press Club with me, Kendall Burton, and my co-host Earl Buske, a show where we review the big stories in the news locally, regionally, and internationally every week, as well as the newspapers of the day. Today's star edition: why has the cabinet shut down the crime lab House of Mystery? The Mirror newspaper: a dubious budget? Question mark. Obviously, the budget presentation and debate happened this week. The Voice newspaper as well: Rigobert flays PM. The subheading calls him enemy of the people. And of course, we have the government paper contained in the Voice newspaper: budgeting and building for better, maintaining the budget theme in the Voice. The Mirror. Interestingly, the Star doesn't have much to say about this week's budget debate.
Not on the head, not on the front page.
Well, I didn't see anything inside either. They focus here on the House of Mystery. What are the big stories for you this week that stuck out in your mind?
Well, obviously,
the budget is
obviously the budget. Another one that didn't sufficiently make the headlines or the news, in my view, was the participation of the Prime Minister in the Caribbean Climate Change Summit in Martinique with President Hollande and France, who subsequently went on to Haiti and announced that France had cancelled all of Haiti's debts. So debt forgiveness for Haiti was a big story for me.
But you know, traditionally environmental stories and climate change aren't sexy. They don't make the news.
Unfortunately.
You know, but the fact is, there's so many issues that surround climate change that are newsworthy. The link isn't always made.
Yeah, because they are continuous issues, because climate continues to change and the spill-off effects. I mean, in Martinique, the Caribbean leaders, and I'm not only talking here about the OECS or CARICOM, but the wider Caribbean, the leaders of those dependent territories like the British Virgin Islands, the Dutch Antilles, the French Antilles, the Dutch Antilles, and the British Virgin Islands, along with CARICOM and the OECS. So President Hollande, for the first time in history, the president of France, a European president, was sitting among Caribbean leaders as an equal. And he actually co-signed a declaration for the France calling on the European countries to do a number of things, bearing the Caribbean and the small island developing states in mind. And that position, the position of the Caribbean countries, was presented by Prime Minister Dr. Kenny Anthony, bearing in mind that he is the lead CARICOM Prime Minister for Sustainable Development, Climate Change, Energy, and such issues. So he presented that appeal, which eventually was adopted in the form of a declaration for the France, in which it was doing a number of things. One, calling on the European countries to do more to allow more access to climate finance by small island developing states, particularly the Caribbean. Secondly, to ensure that the matter of climate change is addressed on the basis of looking at things like greenhouse warming, to ensure that while the responsibility of cleaning up the earth is one of everybody's responsibility, so nonetheless the small island developing states are saying, let's look at it as equal responsibility, but with different levels of responsibility, from the standpoint that those countries that emit the most greenhouse gases should equally make an equal share, consistent with their contribution to the damage, to the cleanup effect.
So in other words, a larger share.
Yeah, a larger share. And thirdly, they also underlined the dangers we face in the OECS, but particularly Prime Minister Anthony made an example of the Windward Islands. And it has been found by scientists that just a 3-meter increase in sea level could wipe away our ports, our airports, coastal villages, and affect 1 million people.
Because as you pointed out, while we might not be the largest emitters we are the most vulnerable.
The most vulnerable,
to
because
climate
we
change,
only emit 0.3% of the greenhouse gases in the world, but we are the most vulnerable from the standpoint of our size. And not only us, we are the Caribbean is part of a wider grouping of small island developing states called SIDS. And they work together. So the SIDS of the Caribbean met in Martinique, the SIDS of the Pacific, the SIDS of the Indian Ocean, they all belong to that wider grouping.
We also hosted an earlier meeting this year of many of those islands from as far as the Pacific Islands.
Yes,
they
yes,
were represented here.
Represented.
And all of this is ahead, we need to point out, of the December meeting in Paris.
Yeah, it's called a Conference of Parties, but basically it is a global conference on climate change, where representatives of all countries, not prime ministers, not presidents, but representatives of all countries, ministers and technocrats, they get together and they flesh out the whole scientific arguments and try and put aside the scientific arguments as against the spiritual arguments, because while the United Nations is a global body, there is division even at the UN as to what causes climate change, whether it is an act of God or an act of man, or those who say it's a combination of both. So the responsibility of the scientists is to navigate through all of that and come up with those arguments that can be proven to be true and that can be measured. So that on the question of sea level rise, that is something that we can see, because as we grow, we can see the beaches receding. We could see that alongside the level of, in terms of the water, the waves eating up the beaches. So if we remember, if those older generations can remember the VG beach or any beach being 12 feet further into the water when they grew up, then we could imagine when our children and grandchildren grow up, if they, at that level, they might have to be swimming home.
Yeah, because I took a picture not more than 10 years ago at the VG beach. I was looking at it recently, and it's amazing the difference in natural space at time. We're talking about our children. I think if we're not careful, in the next 5 years, you'll be
in our lifetime
to step off the road right into the water.
Into the water, yeah. So yes, I think that was a big underreported story across the region. There was still more emphasis in terms of the international media on the decision by the European Union, Western powers, to boycott the Russian observance of the 70th anniversary of the defeat of Nazism at a cost of 20 million Soviet lives. 20 million Soviet lives died 70 years ago to save the world, including Europe, from Nazi Germany. Historians of all political persuasions tell you that the war could not have been won without the Soviet army. Now to boycott, to boycott such a celebration simply to make a political point about the West being vexed about Russia's rule in Ukraine, I think is really a slap in the face of history. But I was glad that it gave President Hollande enough time to be able to organize that conference in Martinique, which really is historic from the standpoint that is historic for him, it is historic for Haiti, it is historic for the region, and what could really put the icing on the cake of its historicity is if the Caribbean is able to get President Hollande as a Caribbean leader, quote unquote, brackets, and chairman of the conference in Paris in December, to gain global support for the Caribbean position and the calls that we are making to for more access to climate finance. The story, as you were saying, it continues. It has tentacles, more tentacles than an octopus. The St. Lucia Development Bank just recently opened a climate finance account, so to speak. The Prime Minister referred to it in his budget address. It was also referred to before that, whereby if, for example, you'll be building a new home and you want to engage in any activity that is going to save energy and reduce dependence on fossil fuel, like introducing solar power or water harvesting, then that facility at the St. Lucia Development Bank will make itself available for you to be able to do those things much cheaper than if you had to do it on the buy the stuff on the regular market.
Yeah. But we're talking about climate change and the fact that we didn't get a lot of coverage in the media this week, in spite of this big meeting happening in Martinique. I wanted to tie that into some of the other stories because we always, as we always do, discuss how the media approaches these stories that we discuss. You talk about the tentacles of climate change, you know, whether it's agriculture, it's national security, which is also implicated. We can touch on that when we come back. We're due for a break, so we'll take that break. When we come back, we'll continue talking about climate change. We'll look at the budget and the coverage of both of those issues. We'll be right back.